Greetings, plebeian, and welcome to Epic Voice Adventures in the Athanasian Creed. Today we are taking a look at the second line. Here's a rubric which no one pays attention to, not even me. Let's get started. Quam nisi quisque integram inviolatatemque. There were way too many T's in that word. Shame on me. Servaverit. Absque dubio in aeternum per ibit. And there we have it. Our very first word is not a verb. We hate that. Let's move on. Nisi quisque integram involitatem. Too many T's again. I need to learn how to read. Servaverit. There we have it. We have our IT ending, but that's not all. We also have ER added onto that. How do we know this is the entire ending for this verb? Well, that V right there, preceded by an A. This is clearly a first conjugation verb. In case you have forgotten, and you better not have, first conjugation verbs form in these four principal parts. Servo, servare, servavi, servatum. And there we have it. The A in the third principal part is followed by a V and are perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect endings. Unless it's subjunctive, in which case it's still something along those lines. So, ERIT is our ending. This is a third person. It is singular, and this is, of course, on the perfect stem. However, we need to determine which of our various options this is. Erit falls under two categories. It can either be the more obvious, perfect subjunctive, or it can be the less obvious, future perfect. They both look identical in this form. Specifically, it is exceedingly frustrating. You have probably the same idea that I do about this. So in order to determine if this is perfect, which is more common, or future perfect, and this would of course be active, and then subjunctive or indicative, we need to look back at all the things we don't care about. Our very first word is quam, coming from qui, quod. It is not the quam that acts as the word than or makes a superlative super-duper superlative. That's not a real term. Don't use it. This is in fact our relative pronoun. Our an there tells us that this is a accusative, singular, and feminine, which means it has to point back to something. Looking in our previous clause, we have Catholicam fidem. Fidem is our noun there. Catholicam is the adjective. Catholicam tells us that fidem is feminine, which you would know if you knew the dictionary entry, like at least 3 Latin students do. Not even me all the time. So, quam must refer back to this noun. And it just translates to the word which, as the direct object of a verb. Moving on, we have nisi, which is a part of the if family. This one normally means unless, which you would also know if you had watched the Vulgate videos. I'm going to stop guilt-tripping you into that at some point. Probably not. For a couple months, honestly. Now, this is as far as we need to go. We can take a look at the rest of this after we handle our whole subjunctive or not subjunctive issue. Nisi, being the word for if, can either take an indicative or it can take a subjunctive. It all depends on what type of clause is being set up. We have a variety of them. Present general, that other one that nobody cares about. Future more vivid. Contrary to fact. Present contrary to fact. Something along those lines. And that one with the pluperfect. Yes, I know them all quite well, obviously. So, as we take a look at our conditional clauses with words of if, the subjunctive appears in mostly the contrary to fact or the less likely ones. The indicative appears in the more happy ones that speak about things that are probable. Well, this isn't happy. Except in this case, it actually is. The perfect subjunctive does not really appear in conditional clauses. It can happen, but that's a more rare occurrence. But we do have a rather common instance where we have an indicative of the future family, and that would be the future more vivid. The future more vivid conditional sentence normally forms with just a plain future indicative, but on some occasions it will form with the future perfect tense, and I will explain what implications the whole perfect part of this has. But for now, we can assume that this is introducing a future more vivid conditional sentence. A future more vivid conditional sentence tells us about an action which is very likely to happen. If so-and-so will do this action, and he most probably will, is the idea behind that. It's not a contrary to fact. If so-and-so does this, and he doesn't, so on and so forth. No, this is an instance of if so-and-so does this, and he most likely does. It does leave open the possibility that the action will not occur, but is leaning more probably in the other direction. And there you have it, my terrible explanation of a future more vivid. You should look it up yourself. Moving on. Now we can take a look at these three, with the assurance that future perfect is the most likely of the two, being an actual conditional sentence, not an extremely rare one. We'll have, and we'll put the proper meanings in there in a minute. Back over here we have quisque. Quisque is very similar to quicunque, except that it doesn't have the kun or the cum, and it's also the interrogative form, all the stuff behind that. But it has a very similar meaning. In this case, it just means whoever or whatever. Taking a look at this one, we have our is ending, which we know from quisquid is actually going to be the nominative singular masculine. So, whoever. That is incorrect. My brain failed me there. Thinking about future more vivids has addled my thoughts. Careful, things like this are radioactive. Warning sign that these things are in fact not radioactive. Moving on. This one actually means not whoever, stupid brain, this means each one. You'd think that would be clear, but this is kind of like that word talus, which during your first year of Latin you can never remember, probably because you haven't actually learned it properly yet. So, unless each one, integrum inviolatamque. Here we have QUE, which, if you were in any of my pretty boring classes, I would have given you the dictionary entry as follows. Note, the second of two things to be joined. Super nerdy and also impossible to understand properly. This is just another form of et, but connects the second thing to the first thing of the same type, if that made any sense in English. Well, as we take a look at these two, they both have the am ending, which means they are both accusative, singular, and feminine. And both of these are also adjectives. They have to have a noun to modify unless they were acting as substantives. Fortunately, we have the next best thing to a noun, quam. Both of these are modifying quam and therefore fidem as their noun. So, integrum just means integrity. And we'll probably have to modify the spelling a little bit in a minute when we take a look at the verb again. And inviolatamque, that one, Tim? Why did I say Tim? Inviolatamque. This one means undamaged, or we could just say inviolate. Unviolated would be another word. I think I'll go with that one. This could in fact actually be a perfect passive participle. T before the first or second declension endings often indicates a either former verb or a present verb participle. So there we have it. So, moving on to this. We have the options of preserve, keep, guard, or save. All this together, then, our options are which, unless each one, or we might say each person, with masculine generic, should probably add that in there, standing for both male and female, unless each person will have preserved its integrity and unviolated, in integrity and inviolated, something like that. We don't have the prepositions, we don't have the possessive, but that would be implied by the context. Unless each person will have kept integrity and inviolated, or unless each person will have saved integrity and unviolated. I'm going to go with kept. / guarded. That's a good word. So there we have the meaning of the very first half of this second line. Moving on, we have obsque dubio in aeternum per ibit, and there we have our verb. We have it as the ending, except that there is a b right before that. Pereo, perire, and then whatever the other principal parts are after that, we don't really need to know. It's interesting that right before this b, there is not in fact an e. So there are two options for this that I can think of off the top of my head. One, this is not actually what I think it is. Two, it's just an unusual form from the 3rd century. I don't know. Another note will fix that for me. So, bit is probably our ending. So that would put this as a third person, singular, future, active, indicative. And this means to perish. And there we have the verb. Now we can move back to the rest of the sentence. In, we have a prepositional phrase right there. Has to end here since we have the verb. In is taking the accusative, which is actually quite common with this word right here. In tells us that this is, of course, accusative and singular. Aeternus. I think this is actually an adjective. So I'm going to treat it as a neuter, since it's talking about an abstract concept of, well, forever. And neuter is often used in that way. Not exclusively, but often. Into eternity. That's pretty dark. Obsque. Obs is actually a form of or ob. Read this. Oh, no, that's terrible. I read this whole thing about how Cicero used the word. It's not really relevant to us, but essentially it's ob and que is actually acting as a connection for this between these two clauses. In some way, it's kind of confusing. But obs with dubio here means, in fact, without doubt. And there we have it. Now let's take a look at it in its whole. Which, unless each one person, should probably only say one of those. Which, unless each one will have kept or guarded integrity and unviolated, without doubt he will perish into eternity. Now, to talk about the future perfect nature of this. If you recall, one of the possible uses or understandings for the perfect tense, and in this case the future perfect tense, is that this is an action that has started at some point, but continues on until the designated present time. So, what this would mean is, once he started, and he will have kept it up until whatever point. It's a continuing action that is completed, if that makes any sense at all. Well, thank you very much for joining me. Let's take a look at it from line 1. Yes, no. I'm not going to do that this time. You can read it on your own. We're done. Thank you very much for joining me in the Athanasian Creed, Adventures Thereof, with Epic Voice.
What? You're still awake? Why are you still here then? You should be reading a book. Or if not reading, you should watch one of these other videos. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. See you next week.